Hello, everyone. Welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. I'm Cherie Burton, and this is a podcast for women who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are. And on each of my episodes, I try to highlight someone who's doing that, who is going to great lengths to express their soul voice, who's being who they are authentically to their own soul, to God as they know it. And this is no exception today. We've got Kathryn Knight Sonntag. She's the author of the poetry collection, The Tree at the Center. And there's so much rich symbolism in the tree for the feminine, which we will definitely get into in this episode. I bring on a lot of women, and I will be continuing to bring on women who originated their faith in Mormonism. Kathryn is one who has, and we both share that heritage together. And we also see a lot of the, I guess you could say, the distortions, some of the not so healthy ways in which the patriarchy has suppressed the feminine voice, both within the construct of our religion of origin and many, many others, and not just within religion, but in many of the systems as we see crumbling in our day and time. But the tree is at the center. And again, that is the name of Kathryn's book. She is a landscape architect and land planner. She has a master's degree in that. And she's, again, also a writer and a mother. She actually worked for a time on the LDS temples landscape architecture. For those of you who don't know, Mormonism has many temples dotted throughout the world, and so she had the opportunity to work for a firm in Salt Lake City where they did work on temple grounds. And so she started to see this link between ecology, or earth, or Mother Earth, and theology, which is a big soul expansive path to go down when you really open up to just how present Mother is right under our feet, and the tree and all its archetypal power as it relates to our mother and to our own bodies. Kathryn, I am so grateful that you took the time to, I know this is precious, precious time when your child is napping, your toddler is napping. So I'm just grateful.
Oh, yes. Thank you for having me.
So we're going to dive into an area that I think is just so completely fascinating. This whole, this tree, both archetypally and just literally, right? And how that relates to the feminine, but also, you've had a very interesting journey yourself to how this showed up for you, how it presented itself on your path. Can you just kind of share with us just part of your journey that kind of woke you up to, hey, I was seeing things I found out that I didn't know what I was missing. That's what I like. When I read your book, I'm like, she didn't know what she was missing. And then she found what she was missing.
Yeah. And it's hard to even know when the whole journey began, because I feel like as a child, I was searching for a different realm, I guess, but didn't quite know what that was or what exactly to look for, just that I had a sense of something more inside of myself. So I grew up in the LDS faith and in sort of the heart of Mormonism in Mill Creek, Utah. And I really value those experiences and what I learned about the spirit of discernment and about the Holy Ghost and about listening to my heart. But as I grew older and I progressed on my journey, I just kept feeling that sense that there was something more that I needed to discover. And so I continued being active, going to church. I served a mission in Italy, continued in college to study things that I really loved. I've always had a natural affinity towards the natural world and to being outdoors, and felt a kinship there and a sense of spiritual connection. And so I continued to study environmental issues. I got a degree in environmental studies and then another degree in English. I've always loved to write as well. And so those kind of melded in my undergraduate studies, and came back and did a graduate degree in environmental planning and landscape architecture. And
you have a master's,
got married.
Right. You got a master's degree in that.
Yeah. And so in that time, I actually came back to my love for the tree of life. So I always was fascinated by that image and felt like when we studied it in Sunday school with Nephi and Lehi's vision of the tree of life, I just always felt like there was more to that image that wasn't quite there in the scriptures, at least not in the way that it was explained to me in lessons. There was just something very magical about that image. And as I went into my graduate work, I studied, Joseph Campbell and all of these other, these scholars who really had a finger on what the power of this image is and the archetypal nature of it. And I discovered in my graduate studies, so I did a thesis on the role of the transcendent in landscapes. And that was one of the archetypes that I studied. Wow. I really discovered how it was so tied to the feminine and the divine feminine. And that sort of opened up that, like, what that missing realm had been for me as a child, that it was the realm of the feminine, and that there was this whole hidden landscape and sort of shadowland that locating her in the real world and like a real tree, but then also the symbolic world in that archetype really it just opened up so much understanding for me.
And for a time you did some landscape design working on Latter-day Saint temple landscapes.
Yeah. So after I graduated with my master's, I worked at a firm in Salt Lake, and they still do a ton of work with LDS Church with their landscapes for the temples all across the world. So yeah, it was always sort of a question in the back of my mind, like, where is the mother in like the outward expression of these sacred landscapes? Like, where are we including any markers or symbols of sacred landscapes in our temple designs? And if so, is there anything in there that resembles or sort of symbolizes the mother? And the answer was no.
Not there.
Yeah, not there. And I think that was sort of a heartache. And then also, as I studied more scholars like Margaret Barker, understanding again that the feminine had been inside the temple and had been represented as Asherah in ancient times, in the ancient temples in Jerusalem, that was another, oh, okay, she's not there either. And so, and just I can keep going if you want, but
no, I just think giving people some context here. The Asherah, sometimes she's called the warrior or the lady wisdom. She back, I don't know how many centuries before Christ, she was included in the Holy of Holies in these temples, or in the temple, I should say, in Jerusalem. And through empires, I don't know which king it was.
Josiah.
King Josiah. So he removed and destroyed her from the temple. Anything related to the feminine in terms of their station in the heavens, if you will, just their culture and their voice. And so this became a whole, I think it was always a mystery. It's not like they, had it down back then. This has always been a mystery, but it was like they were worshiping her at the center of it all. And then she was wiped. Now I have to say, like, I'm like you, I took an academic route. I went on an LDS mission. I definitely saw some very bureaucratic things happening on my mission in terms of numbers and whatever. I just kind of resisted, like, why are we really here? This is about people and the spirit. But it was also like, I came back and I leaned more into feminism. And I don't know that I would have necessarily categorized it as that back then, or even because it had such a heavy, like, it was taboo to be called a feminist. Yeah. This is like the early 90s, mid 90s. And I remember when I went to BYU, right about the time I was at BYU after my mission. And for those of you who don't know, it's Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. A lot of people go there after their missions or before, or even if they don't serve missions, it's an LDS private university. It's quite prolific, actually. But anyway, so I I was there when they excommunicated the September 6th. September 6th, are you familiar with that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So these were...
Maxine Hanks wrote a blurb for my poetry collection.
Okay. She was one of them. Interestingly, the Margaret Toscano, Levana Fielding Anderson, a bunch of these women and men were sort of, and I can't speak with specificity about exactly what happened, but in essence, they were excommunicated for speaking out against some of these things that are now being more put into the forefront because of the internet and other things. But it was like, where is mother? How do we access mother? What about this history? What about that? I don't know. What is your perception of what the September 6th were up to? Because you probably have a deeper connection with that through Maxine.
Oh, well, I don't necessarily. It's just sort of, we're coming into an age where information control is just really impossible. And the church is finally having to reckon with things that they were sort of able not to have to deal with for a long time. And so I think the collective voice of women also saying, we want answers, we need answers, we want to be heard, we want a place at the table, and having people like Maxine Hanks who were excommunicated and now have rejoined, having sort of the ear of these higher ups can influence more dialogue and more change. Like, it's just a very different landscape than it was back then.
Right. It was, anything related to Equal Rights Amendment, all the way up through the 70s into the 80s of just, there was this whole silencing of any kind of feminist discussion because these people would get excommunicated. And when we're saying feminism, we're really talking about egalitarian, come to the table, invitational. I love Maxine Hanks. I do want to interview her, actually.
She's fabulous.
She's amazing. And I know she wrote a book on women and authority about reemerging Mormon feminism or something.
Yeah, Women in Authority, Reemerging Mormon Feminism. Yep. Yeah.
So I think the term feminism is becoming less stigmatized, I guess, and it's just more embraced now. It's like, oh, well, it's time. It's just the rising of the feminine. It's feminism. It's feminine. It's good.
Yeah, I think though it's a very clear indicator that the rising of the feminine is also threatening to toxic masculinity.
Very much so.
It's threatening to the status quo. So there's a lot about it that is not only uncharted waters and territory, but also potentially destructive. And I think that people sense that, and there's a fear about that.
Sure. And I love in your poetry book, by the way, you're a brilliant poet. And the book that we're going to be drawing from is called The Tree at the Center. And I'll have links to that in the show notes. And I know you're writing still more, but this was published in 2019. But you talk about this link between the ecology and our theology. I think you call it eco-theological work, which is the landscape of mother, the actual earth, and how we're seeing this the way that toxic masculinity has devalued the landscape, destroyed it. And now we're trying to build it. This is what I'm thinking when I'm thinking feminine rising. I'm not just thinking about the spiritual aspect of it. I'm thinking about the physical. And you are involved in that kind of work as well.
Oh, yeah. And I think a key element to rediscovering the realm of the feminine is understanding that it is a theology of embodiment. That's so much about the unbalance in the world right now is the heart of it is disassociation and disembodiment and disintegration and sort of thinking that we can silo ourselves off and live independently and live in hierarchical structures, and that is somehow sustainable, and that it will somehow lead us like the Tower of Babel to heaven, when it's just pure destruction. So coming into a feminine realm is acknowledging that those systems are of Babylon and will not connect us in love and harmony, and will not heal our internal landscapes, let alone the external. There's a direct link between the way the world is treated, the earth is treated, and how women have been treated throughout time. And that is, I mean, the roots of that is in the ecofeminist movement. And discovering that for me has been just completely a paradigm shift that will just continue to unfold and help me reorganize the way that I understand myself and the world and deity. So it's a huge reframing for me. And the book really is doing that. It's using language to recreate language in order to recreate theology and to really weave women and femininity into, well, the key moments, I guess, in Christendom and Mormondom, right? The key moments of epiphany and revelation, from Christ being on the cross to Joseph Smith having his first vision in the sacred grove, to Lehi seeing the vision of the tree of life in the Book of Mormon. This isn't just like an imagining of the mother, it's a seeing of the mother because she was there. And so it's a very
the tree of
tender,
life.
Yeah. So it's a very tender exploration for me. It's a very personal and vulnerable exploration.
That's so beautiful. And a lot of this came from a space. Well, I want to talk about Joseph Campbell, and then I want to talk about how you moved and everything changed for you and you became a mother. Because it does. It kind of like, you can read about these, you can read the symbolism, and then you can like pine and claw for your mother, your divine mother, and realize that, oh, she's been under your feet this whole time. She's right here. She's part of the Holy Spirit, if you will. I don't like the term Holy Ghost anymore. I don't know if that makes me a heretic, but it reminds me of the masculine and which ghosted the Holy Spirit, which is very feminine. She came in like a dove when Christ was getting baptized, but it was written differently. What we got canonized. Very different.
Yeah, that happened a lot.
It did. With the, let's go back to Joseph Campbell for a minute, because anytime anyone mentions him, because I actually, his hero's journey is amazing, and everything, Hero with 1,000 Faces that he wrote, it's just absolutely a beautiful classic and groundbreaking around this archetype and the hero's journey. And I interviewed Maxine, I always want to call her Maxine, Maureen Murdoch, who wrote The Heroine's Journey on this podcast. And she talked about exactly, this whole, descent journey and going into the underworld and being buried in the earth, really, and kind of incubating and gestating and then rising up and kind of finding yourself, and then people along the way, right? I wish I could say verbatim and there's like 8 steps, but the very top, and I think Joseph Campbell's, it's you find the elixir, but in hers, it's like you've integrated the masculine and feminine. And when we do that inside of ourselves, I feel like that's when we really become embodied, that we don't have to identify with toxic masculine or toxic feminine. We recognize we have these structures inside of us. And like, what does that mean for Cherie? What does that mean for Kathryn? It's very different for each one of us.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty, is that there's a sort of loose structure to the cyclic nature of an ascension journey. But the specifics are so unique to each individual. And I think we live in a landscape, in a world right now where people have sort of a, what's the right word? They don't want to look at the world in binaries, right? There's this whole movement to more inclusion, to more nuance, to a greater understanding. I think it's just a collective consciousness that's rising, especially as we look at the issues that have come to the forefront with racism and understanding,
just all the
really
duality.
acknowledging the role of these systems in distorting, the potential for equality and power, and how it's distributed and what it really is, and just a lot of possibility for the discussion of needing more nuance in our conversations and how we approach each other. And so when we talk about feminine and masculine, there's also that sort of tension of, well, those are binaries. And how do we talk about those in a way that feels inclusive? Because the way that I express femininity is going to be different than the way that you express it. And so, so much of that personal journey is discarding, first of all, the things that we need to let die. And part of that is what have you incorporated? What have you ingested that is giving you false identities around what is masculine, what is feminine?
Sure.
How do you untangle yourself from all of that? And then trust the process, like trust it in that descent into really uncomfortable, potentially scary realms of like your psyche and your internal landscape. Like, how do you trust the mother, because she is the guide in that landscape, to give you understanding and knowledge and wisdom to move through that and arise with the very unique sort of compilation of gifts and abilities and talents and understanding and discernment that you can manifest that rebalancing, excuse me.
Yeah.
That rebalancing in the world. And that's going to be so different. I think that's the beauty of it, is that there's no like bullet list of like masculinity is this, femininity is this. I mean, if you really wanted to pin things down, I think there are a few descriptors you could list, but the way they're expressed is so different that it's just like worlds and worlds and worlds of possibility. And for me, that is so important to understand, because there is no perfectly feminine individual. There is no perfectly masculine individual. No. Like, this is just
Barbie and Ken.
Well, for patriarchy, yes, that's, but like, it's like yin yang. It's like it's only for conceptual use that we even have the idea of yin and yang. Like, it's just a way to sort of navigate through the journey. Sure. So I think that has been a huge part of it for me, is understanding that we can talk about masculine and feminine, not necessarily as binaries in the sense that they need to be there and balanced. They're different, but not as like different preconceived. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They're different anatomically and energetically, but that doesn't make them, you can merge, they're not at odds, and you can merge them. I love that. And that, we could go into a whole discussion on, my thoughts around how we have been wounded by the masculine, and therefore we see it a certain way that it's not actually that way. It's just an illusion. It's been built up as an illusory structure. I would love for you to read some of your poetry to us. And I really wanted to circle back to when you became a mother, because you'd written and you'd studied and you became a feminist in your own right. And then you became pregnant. How did that change the literal landscape and the figurative landscape for you?
Right. You expect certain things, right? You expect some of the physical changes, but it's so unique. Like, the way that my body and my mind and my heart responded to it, like, is completely unique. But I think the thing that surprised me the most was how alone I felt in the journey. Like, it had never been more clear to me in my mind how like separate I was from my husband, how he would never understand any of it. And in that, I felt this deep, deep need for other women to connect, to like have conversations, to speak unspeakable things about like not just pregnancy, because I know not every woman has that opportunity or desires that, but like, what is this femininity that we embody? And like, how do we talk about it in the world in a way like that doesn't feel threatening to other people, or that feels more authentic, or that like allows for those nuances and those conundrums and paradoxes and pain to just like be. And so kind of melding that personal experience, pregnancy was difficult for me with both of my pregnancies. Well, I had 3 pregnancies, 2 which produce living children. But for those two full-term pregnancies, I struggled the whole time. Like physically, it was so hard for me. I mean, I was pregnant at 32 and 35. So a little older. And I don't know how much that really contributed, except for I just remember I felt so exhausted and I had nothing serious, but just a lot of issues physically that were difficult, and mental stuff, right? Like pregnancy fog is real. Like I struggled in my work, just like being able to remember things and to stay awake, like at my desk. And, just like my ability to really like hold and retain information. Like it felt like all my processes were going into that creation, and just everything was going into the body. Like my body was thinking. I couldn't actually think in my brain, if that makes any sense. Like it was just like this.
It was an embodied experience that transcended anything logical or even language. So it was just like being present, like from moment to moment is all I could do, was just be like, it forced that sort of presence. Roll with it. And I think, Eli and Emma, the youngest two, the last child I gave birth to, I was 32. And then I have the 12 years of waiting and 4 miscarriages. But then when the 2 younger ones finally showed up through the 2 separate private adoptions, Eli and Emma, I was 40, let me think for a minute. Almost 44 when Eli was born, and 45 when Emma was 45 and a half-ish when Emma was born. And even though I didn't carry them, I went into a similar brain fog, because I had a relationship with birth mothers. And in fact, Eli's birth mother lived with us through most of her pregnancy. And so I experienced a lot of phantom pregnancy symptoms. It was very, very interesting. So having given birth to 4 children and then having children come this way, it was no different. But I would love for you to read your poem Labor, because so visceral. When I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't given birth for 19 years, but I'm right there.
Nice. Let me grab it.
It's on page 33. And if you look at the number 33, there's a lot of symbolism to that. I'm just saying it's totally coincidental, but the fact that it's on page 33, it's cool.
Labor. When the body fills with tiny hooves, pressing in the early hours before dawn, some prodding softest flowers, reverberations of past lives, cities, open doors, mourn the already granulated shadows of a new dawn, Christmas crowning, the first news of chains broken. Flanks flash white, celestial blue, primordial waves press my womb. The way out, they say, is through, never breaching the cold earth, the kingdom never over the next horizon. We, clan of mothers, remember the light parted, the shells dashed, the pearl drawn out from still clattering chambers of the deepest, sweetest twist of tissue. There is the mother on bended knee, in the great mind of the body, spurring the horses on and on and on.
Chills. That's just so beautiful and raw and celestial at the same time.
Thank you.
And, the whole metaphor of birth, and just everything and rebirth, honestly. Being in the underbelly of not knowing and feeling the contraction of life and things pressing on you. And you described, this kind of surging process as flanks flash white, celestial blue, primordial waves pressing on your womb. When you think about fetal position, like there's one thing for a baby to be in the womb in fetal position. And when you're in a rebirth, that's what you do. You go to your womb, men and women, they go into fetal position in there and they connect back into in an attempt to connect back into their center and their womb. and just wanting to feel. You said the thing that surprised you the most about your motherhood journey was that you felt alone. And I would have to say that I very much resonate with that, because whether you're giving birth or you are being rebirthed yourself, you feel so alone. And even though you are being supported, you don't feel it. You know that you're the one who has to, get this child out if you're actually giving birth, or if you're in a rebirth cycle in yourself. You even mentioned this in that line, that the only way out is through. That there's a space where you discover, like, this has to come through me. I have to bring this forward. I'm the one who brings this forward.
Yeah. And that is so vital. It's the only way on an ascension journey to move from dependence on whether it's parent or an institution or a spouse or friends, like the movement inward to take responsibility for and have sovereignty over your own spiritual journey is necessary. I think it's hard sometimes from an LDS background to come up against that knowledge. Sometimes it really requires something traumatic or difficult or a massive challenge for us to realize that a prophet saying something to a general audience is not going to sustain us through that, and that we have to reach for the divine unmitigated. We have to, or there's no salvation, in terms of there's no rebirth, there's no transformation inside of your own soul. And I think that for me, really, I had experienced difficult things before then. I had been through some difficult experiences in my life. And so I feel like I had a sense for that already. Like I knew that God, the God that really lived inside of me and really spoke to me, would require me to do that again and again. And that each time it would be a requirement for a deeper trust and a deeper sense of, okay, you've done this before. Trust me that this deeper darkness, this deeper, this greater need for you to trust me will lead to even greater enlightenment and light and expansion.
Yes, and yes. When you were, and this whole thing about the tree, I don't know if you've studied much about with the Gnostic Gospels and Mary Magdalene, but in the Gospel of the Beloved Companion, there's a section where, and for those of you who don't know, the Gospel of the Beloved Companion is a text that surfaced in 2000. Well, it didn't surface in 2010, but it was translated into English in 2010, and it's a companion to the Gospel of Mary, and it's an interesting text in the sense that it's considered to be a source text as opposed to a fragmented text, that it was preserved by the Cathars and preserved in Spain and held in this beautiful space until the right person came to translate it. And so the woman who translated it, her name is Jean-Yves Leloup. I believe that's her name. And it's interesting because it's one of those texts where you're like, oh, well, this could be, like her own thing, like that she just put out there, or this actually could be a real text. It's one of those things you kind of have to, sorry, Jean-Yves Leloup is not the one. That is a different author of a different Mary Magdalene series. I'll have to find her name. Anyway, the Gospel of the Beloved Companion, her name is Jean. There's so many French names. But it's believed to be the text that was preserved in France when Mary was teaching there. And there's so much history there in France about Mary Magdalene. But anyway, there's a whole section in there about a tree. Have you read much about this? I have the book. Yes. Okay. So the Gospel of the the author of the Gospel of the Beloved Companion is Jean de Crillon, or Jean. It's a feminine form of John. And yeah, so this is a text that surfaced in 2010. It's believed that it's an original source text written in Alexandrian Greek, brought from Egypt to the Languedoc region of France during the early to middle part of the first century. It's so interesting, I spent the weekend diving into the tree part of this, where Christ is taking Mary to her inner tree, telling her that she has a tree inside of her. Mm-hmm. And just the boughs and what they represent, and how, we are to be rooted first in this unconditional love. And when we feel that rooted, so interesting when we look at other allegories that are more masculine, like the tree of life in the Book of Mormon, let's just say the tree is, there's nothing about the roots. There's nothing about the earth. It's all the outer branches and the outer, ultimately the fruit is what we want. We want to feel the fruit of the highest state that Christ tells Mary is the state of grace and beauty, where you've ascended to all of these 8 levels, all the way from, and then there's a test at each level, or a demon, if you will, that presents itself, or a guardian that is like a threshold guardian that takes you through each, or you're confronted with a part of yourself. So it's inner work, it has nothing to do really with what's happening outside of you. So when you talk about having this unmitigated experience with the divine to be rebirthed, it's like, that's so true. It's all happening inside of you. This tree is you. You are the tree.
Mm-hmm. And anyone inside the LDS religion is familiar with that from Alma, from the book of Alma, chapter 32, that imagery of a tree inside of us that we have to plant the seed. And the seed, in Alma is different, but not, it's referred to as the word. But for me, that the word is that direct communion with deity. So it's not, reading Alma's words. It's not reading scripture per se. It's hearing the word in your body. It's hearing it in your flesh, in your mind, in your heart, and responding to that in a consistent manner, in a way in which you are able to nourish and allow for that seed to sprout and to reach those roots down into the earth and the branches up into the sky, and to expand upward and downward, right? So you have this expansion that is grounded in the very, reality of the temporal sphere, and that reaches down into the underground sphere, which, would be that sort of
the complex root system.
Yeah. And this sort of metaphorically, like the subconscious, and also going back into your own personal history, like all of your, like the realm of the ancestors, like what makes you, and what supports you, and what, ecologists talk about root systems as like the elemental, the fundamental portion of the tree. If, the roots are where the true identity of the tree is, you can cut branches back. You can almost cut a tree down to a stub and a stump, and that tree can regrow if the roots are intact and healthy. So I think that having that image,
I think it was like the root chakra, the lowest chakra, the really in the ascension process, when you look at like yogi and the ancient sages, saints, mystics, yogis, they knew this, that our body is the tree. Our body is the root, the bottom chakra, the bottom wheel of light in Sanskrit is root. So there's a saying in yoga, you have to root to rise.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I love that, the imagery in the Magdalene text, that you have, it's sort of an expansion of that image for me from Alma, that you have to move through these degrees and these sort of thresholds of ascension. And while that feels sort of linear, it's not. Like, it's a very cyclical progression that sort of has you reevaluate where you've been and reassess and take the tools that you've gained and repurpose them almost, and make them more and have them expand and have them sort of become exponentially great as you move toward letting go of what binds us on earth in all of the negative ways, in all of the corrosive and destructive ways.
Sure.
And really being stripped from those false identities and accepting the divinity that is inside of us, right? So we're growing the internal tree, and at the same time, we're reaching the external tree. We're reaching the mother. The beautiful part for me of that image is at the end of that internal journey is a feminine figure. Like, at the top of those branches, she encounters that divine feminine. And for me, it's like, there's no difference in a very profound way of encountering herself and encountering the mother. And I think that's the ultimate quest, right? Is that we are making one and united the internal realm with the external. That is how we manifest. That's how the gods manifest. Like, this creation, this earth is a manifestation of their internal beingness. Like, the beauty that we are, the beauty in a wolf, the beauty in a mountain, the beauty in the moon and the stars is their manifestation. And so when you see an archetypal tree, you're seeing the internal beauty and presence of deity. Like, it's there. And I think that's why. So
you should literally go hug a tree, honestly.
Well, yeah.
All of every time I go into like meditation and I want to feel safe for whatever reason, I'm always under a tree or by a tree. Just that sheltering, stable. Even a lot of the tree oils and tree essential oils I use, like sandalwood and vetiver and frankincense, they're tree oils, and they ground and stabilize, because I don't mean to interrupt your flow with that. It just feels like what you're saying about, here's this outer manifestation, but this undergrounded, very networked, if you will, root system to our ancestors, to the earth herself, is part of our ascension process. It's, it is like, I think that's fascinating. You would know this because you're a landscape architecture planning person, but, when you only really need the roots to hold the trees true, the knowledge and wisdom of who that tree is embedded in the roots.
Yeah.
I want you to read two more poems. One is 9 months postpartum, because there's so much richness in that one. You have a 9-month baby now, and your body is different. And also there's differences. I think we can go 9 months postpartum into many phases of our lives after we birth something. And that's the first one I want you to read. And then I would love for us to wrap with Renaissance. Or is it Renaissance? It's Renaissance.
Yeah. Renaissance.
Renaissance. Okay.
9 months postpartum. You don't remember, so I tell you, under the maple, how I was the bridge that landed you safely under a full summer moon. I was the parted veil. I tell you also, though not in words, how I have never felt so disconnected from the earth and the heavens that I breached, from the dirt, from the I am, thunder, not in sound, but in force, used to move up my legs, vibrations grounding me here, the light above grounding me there. I wanted to be the constant revolving sun for you, sun, dropped like an arrow, but instead I am the molted skin of an unclaimed creature, full dust and wind, trying to understand how everything left me when I had you. How, with your shimmering small life, I mostly think about death, how suns do burn out, how this gorgeous spreading maple will one day succumb to a break in its bark and give way to spores, then beetles, then woodpecker, emerald mosses instead of wood. I tell you, I think it's okay to mourn the loss of things we cannot name, as what tethered me became shadow, as the infant you rolled down my back, your gray beard waving.
Wow. Explain to me, I'm getting so much richness here. Where were you going with that? What were you really in your embodied state? What were you feeling, saying? Especially that last line, how it's okay to mourn the loss of things we cannot name, as what tethered me became shadow, as the infant you rolled down my back, your gray beard waving.
We have this massive, beautiful maple tree in our backyard. And this came out of a moment when I was back there with my son. So this was my firstborn son. And I went through pretty severe postpartum depression after he was born. 9 months, after this delivery, still feeling very disconnected from the sense that I had of being, I had this sense of, yes, I was this vessel, and yes, I was this connective power, but now I don't know who I am, and I don't relate to the God that I knew, and I don't relate to the person that I was. And sort of, I don't know, anyone who's been through depression, there's this deep sense of loss and solitude and loneliness that almost just nothing and no one can break through. And so there was sort of this feeling of loss in that, and a loss that a feeling that I was losing things before I could actually articulate what they were, and seeing in my mind's eye my child growing from baby to old man, right? That there's this sort of microcosm that you see this baby descending through your body to the earth, and then to the earth, like the earth claims it. The earth is now the home of the child, and you're sort of helpless as each day is one more step of removal, one more step away, one more step of separation between you and your child as they grow and they become independent and they inhabit their own realm. You are no longer their home. Right. And so I think it was a combination of all of those things. And really, poetry is hard to to understand, because so many times it comes from a deep place of you don't know, like you're just expressing things that come on a very subconscious level and that are very embodied, and you're happy if the words that come out on the page just brush up against what you can't articulate.
For me, what I really embodied as I listened to you and as I'm looking at the actual pages in my book that you're reading, it feels like the grief that mother feels when we forget her. When we've gone off, it's been 9 months. It's about the time that I gestated you, and now you don't know that you've lost what you can't name. And I think we've done this collectively as we've been talking throughout this discussion. We have, and you eloquently talk about this in your introduction, like she's in exile. Our mother is in exile, and we haven't just forgotten her. Like there's been a literal attempt to exile her from the erasure in the Holy of Holies all the way up to our modern structures. And
that's where the sadness comes in, right?
Yes,
like this
that's
deep
the loss that you're feeling in the depression. It's this loss.
And this deep feeling that you are not, as a symbol of the mother, as a symbol of the divine, as being part of a subjugated group on the earth, that your presence here is unwelcome. Like there's a deep sense of like violence in that, and a feeling of like impending doom, like honestly. Yeah. And I think learning more about how the Divine Mother was like violently uprooted from the temple really like made real for me the source of that like sense that women have of like always having to be on our guard, always having to watch our back, always having to check, you know, for our keys or that our doors are locked, whatever it is, like that there's this sense that there's something about us that is a threat to the larger world.
Yeah.
And that is just something we live with, and something that we, as we progress through our journeys, our spiritual journeys, and we become more and more awake, it becomes more and more present.
Sure. And I remember when I had my first child, it was like, how do people do this more than once? Like,
yeah,
how do people, it was just like everything, the world exploded. It just, everything became different. And it was so all consuming, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, everything. And then there's a forgetting, right? You know, with time, you know, you move. And I like to think that each of us were birthed cosmically in the same way, however that works on the other side. I don't know, that there was such a conscious incubation for our souls, and such an intentional nurturing. And this veil we pass through here is like that, such a disorientation from that break, and our whole lives, it's the loss we can't name, the sadness we can't name. But then you see the building up of these masculine structures, the scaffolding to God, the distancing, the shame, the God on a throne, you have to be worthy to be around and look up to, and not realizing that these roots is trying to sustain us and have sustained us all along, and have been totally looked past in favor of what you can see in the material world. Okay, so let's end with Renaissance, because I just think this really encapsulates, and when we're talking about birth and rebirth, I think this really encapsulates everything we're talking about.
Renaissance. I birth my own body, unspool, hand back the rib. I dream of woman made, woman of which man-made woman cannot conceive. I birth my own, name from the end of a cord, still pulsing under eternal multiflorous boughs, break sack, emerge, effulgent and ravenous, for a mother tongue and a motherland. Next to me, a lion and a lamb purr in the grass. Every forest is green and rising, rising.
Well, that people might want to rewind that and listen to that again, because it's just, there's so much there. And I just want to thank you for your gifts and for being willing to talk to me, especially while your husband mans the fort there as you're expressing, and what a beautiful like thing that you like are in early motherhood right now, and that we're flowing with this discussion. And I think so many women and men get lost in parenting and need some anchor to their gifts, expression to humanity in whatever small or large sphere that needs to be. You talked about ascension being cyclical, and I see that as the perfect description of integrating the masculine and feminine, because the feminine herself is cyclical, but ascension is masculine in nature. And yes, every time you have a new child, that's a new cycle of creation. Every time many women listening to this have never given birth, I'm sure. So, and men, obviously. So just know that your life is a series of births and rebirths. And at some point, like for me, my big rebirth happened a few years ago, where I had to take back my sovereignty and I knew that it was the feminine rising, as the end of this Renaissance poem, you mentioned the lamb and the lion together, and what's rising from here, what's rising after you rebirth it can be so sacred and so powerful and so devastating and excruciating. Any parting thoughts, Kathryn, about your work, or even just anything that you want to share before we wrap up?
I think maybe the last thing I want to share is maybe the importance of really taking the moment that we have on Earth right now, when we're sort of in a state of uncertainty in ways that we've never known before, with the pandemic, with all sorts of political instability, with all the things that are coming up, the collective issues we have around racism, around so many aspects of inequality, that it really is an opportunity for us to look inward and to ask hard questions and to learn how to trust that we will be held, that we will be taken care of, that we can trust the mother and the father and the son. We can trust our ancestors. We can trust those who love us. We can trust all of creation to support us as we ask hard questions and try to reconcile and reach out and reconnect, that is the purpose of why we're here. And it's an opportunity to let go of distractions and to express to the divine that we want to know them and that we want to be connected.
Yeah, that is a glorious way to wrap up. Thank you, Kathryn.
Thank you so much.
I just want to read another of Kathryn's poems. It's called She Who Joins Together. Since the cloven fruit, whose name we can't remember, since Adam pulled themselves apart, the world separates. The longest thread of life in me knows it can't remember the passwords once spoken that held our place with the stars. Only that the seal of creation is her name finally spoken, the return of forest, the Amen re-embodied, visions of eternal forms Abraham saw on nights thick with stars of which we know nothing. There is wisdom in the order, traces, and nerves, new names to bind us, clan of lions, more pure than our eyes at birth. I hope that you will get this book and hold it close to your heart as I have. It's called The Tree at the Center, and you can find it on Amazon, and also find Kathryn's work on KathrynKnightSonntag.com. Have a glorious week, and remember to ask to join Women Seeking Wholeness Facebook group. You can also find me on Cherie.Burton on Instagram.